England in the fall, so I'm so ready for fall. Also, I like Mondays. Prove me wrong. I love Mondays. Um, for what I do, it's always been this way in my life. Being a pastor's kid, Sunday's kind of a work day too. And Monday has always been, for me, a sort of the letdown day, like the rest. I work Mondays. A lot of pastors take Mondays off. I've decided to work Mondays. I like to just keep my thoughts running and take the day off later on in the week. And so, yeah, I'm excited for the day ahead. I generally start studying my Sunday sermon on Monday and let that be in my mind all week long. So, getting back into Philippians chapter 3 today. So, it's been wonderful. Book of Daniel. Today we're in chapters 4 through 6. And exciting stories for Daniel. A lot of danger, a lot of wickedness that is up against the people of God. You'll see the wickedness in chapters 4 and 5 and most of chapter 6. But Babylon's not a good place if you are a follower of Jesus, follower of God. And this first story is always stuck in my mind of the consequences of sin and pride. And you actually get, well, let's just read it. It's Nebuchadnezzar, and it's his big moment of humility, actually. Let's read it. Chapter 4. Nebuchadnezzar the king, unto all the people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied unto you. One of the interesting things is that Nebuchadnezzar actually writes this. This is the guy who throws people into fiery furnaces. This is the guy who says that if you can't interpret my dream, I'm going to cut you into a bunch of little pieces and burn up your houses, and it'll be like a dunghill. And this is the guy that took Jerusalem, took the Jews into captivity. I mean, this is not a good person. And by the time God is done with him, he writes a chapter of the Bible. And we're going to read it today. It just blows my mind. Verse 2. I thought it good to show the signs and wonders that the high God hath wrought toward me. How great are his signs, and how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation. You know, all we have to go off of the Old Testament people, whether or not they were saved, it's a little less, I guess, explicit and particular. When a person after Jesus rose again got saved, it was based on faith in Christ, faith in his good news. And prior to that, it was faith. For Abraham was justified by faith, and faith justification was even well before there was even a law. People used to misunderstand the law, and that covenant was intended to be a way that people could earn their salvation. No, it's always been by faith, well before even Moses' law was written down. And those things were, like we talked about in church yesterday. Maybe you weren't there, but we talked about the difference between a biblical perspective of salvation and a legalistic perspective. Biblical says, I believe God, therefore I'm going to serve him with my life. And a legalistic perspective says, I'm going to serve God with my life so that I can earn acceptance by God. And that is an old tyrant that you can never satisfy. But anyway, here in Daniel 4, man, I lost my train of thought. Maybe Monday's not that great for me. I forgot where I was going. So there was a direction for that. I just don't know where it was. So sorry about that. So anyways, here's Nebuchadnezzar and his words. And hey, we're back. We're back after that short commercial break. We were talking about salvation, and I was wondering. I never told you what I was wondering. I was wondering if we'll meet if we'll meet Nebuchadnezzar in heaven, if he was saved or not, because it just simply says, "The just shall live by faith." after all this happened, Nebuchadnezzar has a pretty strong, in chapter 4 of Daniel, a pretty strong testimony. Or at least he is saying that God is the most high God, and he has signs and wonders. So, interesting thoughts. I wonder if we'll meet Nebuchadnezzar in heaven. I don't know. Anyway, verse 4. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at rest in mine house and flourishing in my palace. I saw a dream which made me afraid, and the thoughts upon my bed and the visions of my head troubled me. Therefore made I a decree to bring in all the wise men of Babylon before me, that they might make known unto me the interpretation of the dream. Then came in the magicians, the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers, and I told the dream before them, but they did not make known unto me the interpretation thereof. But at the last Daniel came in before me, whose name was Belteshazzar, according to the name of my God, and in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. And before him I told the dream, saying, O Belteshazzar, master of the magicians, because I know that the spirit of the holy gods is in thee, and no secret troubleth thee, tell me the visions of my dream that I have seen, and the interpretation thereof. Thus were the visions of mine head and my bed. I saw, and behold, a tree in the midst of the earth, and the height thereof was great. The tree grew and was strong, and the height thereof reached unto heaven, and the sight thereof to the end of all the earth. The leaves thereof were fair, and the fruit thereof much, and in it was meat for all the beasts of the field. And in it was meat for all. The beasts of the field had shadow under it, and the fowls of the heaven dwelt in the boughs thereof, and all flesh was fed of it. I saw in the visions of my head upon my bed, and behold, a watcher, and an holy one came down from heaven. He cried aloud and said thus, Hew down the tree, and cut off his branches, shake off his leaves and scatter his fruit. Let the beasts get away from under it, and the fowl from his branches. Nevertheless, the stump of his roots in the earth, even with a band of iron and brass in the tender grass of the field, and let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the beasts in the grass of the earth. Let his heart be changed from man's, and let a beast's heart be given unto him, and let 7 times pass over him. This matter is by the decree of the watchers, and the demand of the word by the word of the holy ones, to the intent that the living may know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will, and setteth up over it the basest of men. This dream I, King Nebuchadnezzar, have seen. Now thou, O Belteshazzar, declare the interpretation thereof, for as much as all the wise men of my kingdom are not able to make known unto me the interpretation, but thou art able, for the spirit of the holy gods is in thee. So, Nebuchadnezzar's writing Daniel 4, and he starts off in the present tense, at the beginning there, but then in verse 4, he starts telling a story that happened in the past. So this is actually sometime in the past that this all happened, and so now Nebuchadnezzar is writing about the dialogue that he and Daniel had a while back. So he had this dream, and in this dream, there's this really strong tree that's got strong leaves and fruit that's feeding everybody. It's providing shade for these animals. Basically, the idea is this tree is a life-giving source and a shelter. It's kind of like the central hub of everything that lives. Symbolic of Nebuchadnezzar. He's the king, and so through him to come all of the life-giving decrees and protection for the people that he leads. So the idea is this tree is Nebuchadnezzar, and this guy comes and he chops down the tree, and he scatters all the fruit. So it's no longer useful for nourishment. The tree is no longer useful for protection, so all the animals flee. All the leaves are shaken off. It's no longer useful for shade. I mean, this tree is... And then it kind of like takes a different turn and then talks about whoever this tree was now going to be like a beast of the field himself, unable to be that nourishment and that protection and that shade for the people. All he's good for is eating grass. So this is a prophecy of Nebuchadnezzar. You are going to be a beast. I mean, literally, This is not figurative, okay? And you're going to read that here in a second. So, which is actually a theme in the Bible that I'll just briefly talk about, is often in the Bible. So even back in Genesis 1 and 2, the moment man is lifted up in pride and leaves God's design, he loses something in himself. And so when Adam and Eve, they take of the fruit, immediately their humanity was affected very negatively. And they realize they're naked, they don't trust each other, they stand God up at their regular meeting that they never missed before, and all the stuff that happened. You zoom forward just a little bit, and then the firstborn son of Adam kills the second-born son, and basically sin makes us beasts. We lose the design. The design of humanity is to be the image of God. And when we sin, we mar that image, and we become less like special image-bearing humans and more like animals. And so this is a very real example of that going on. All right, we'll just go verse 18. Then this dream I, King Nebuchadnezzar, have seen. Now thou, O Belteshazzar, declare the interpretation thereof, for as much as all the wise men of my kingdom are not able to make known unto me the interpretation, but thou art able, for the spirit of the holy gods is in thee. Then Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, was astonished for 1 hour, and his thoughts troubled him. The king spake and said, Belteshazzar, let not the dream or the interpretation thereof trouble thee. Belteshazzar answered and said, My lord, the dream be to them that hate thee, and the interpretation thereof to thine enemies. I imagine Daniel might be a little nervous to make this interpretation, knowing who Nebuchadnezzar is. Verse 20. The tree that thou sawest, which grew and was strong, whose height reached unto the heaven, and the sight thereof to all the earth, whose leaves were fair, and the fruit thereof much, and in it was meat for all, under which the beasts of the field dwelt, and upon whose branches the fowls of the heaven had their habitation. It is thou, O king. Thou art grown and become strong. For thy greatness is known, and reacheth unto heaven, and thy dominion is the end of the earth. And whereas the king saw a watcher, and an holy one coming down from heaven, and saying, Hew the tree down, and destroy it, yet leave the stump of the roots thereof in the earth, even with a band of iron and brass, in the tender grass of the field, and let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the beasts of the field, till 7 times passed over him. This is the interpretation, O king, and this is the decree of the Most High, which is come upon my lord the king, that they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and they shall make thee to eat grass as oxen, and they shall wet thee with the dew of heaven, and 7 times shall pass over thee, till thou know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will. And whereas they commanded to leave the stump of the tree roots, thy kingdom shall be sure unto thee, after thou shalt have known that the heavens do rule. So the promise here is you're going to have this weird experience where you're going to be like a beast, not an attempt, with the intention of humbling you and proving to the world that Nebuchadnezzar is not the King of Kings with a capital K, and he is not as awesome as he thinks he is. So he's so full of pride, God's humbling him, but he's not going to kill him at this moment, and he's also not fully going to remove him as king. He's just taking something of a sabbatical. King's on sabbatical. Where's he going? Oh, he's out in the field eating grass. Okay. But he comes back, God is promising, hey, you'll come back, and you'll be much less powerful, much less full of pride as you once were, but you'll still be king. Verse 27. Wherefore, O king, let my counsel be acceptable unto thee, and break off thy sins by righteousness, and thine iniquities by showing mercy to the poor, if it may be a lengthening of thy tranquility. All this came upon the king Nebuchadnezzar. At the end of 12 months he walked in the palace of the kingdom of Babylon. The king spake and said, Is not this great Babylon that I have built for the house of the kingdom by the might of my power, and for the honor of my majesty? While the word was in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven saying, O King Nebuchadnezzar, to thee it is spoken. The kingdom is departed from thee. And they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. They shall make thee to eat grass as oxen, and 7 times shall pass over thee, until thou know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will. The same hour was the thing fulfilled upon Nebuchadnezzar, and he was driven from men, and did eat grass as oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till his hairs were grown like eagle's feathers, and his nails like birds' claws. And at the end of the days I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up mine eyes unto heaven, and mine understanding returned unto me, and I blessed the Most High. And I praised and honored him that liveth for ever, whose dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation. And all the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing, and he doeth according to his will in the army of heaven, and among the inhabitants of the earth, and none can stay his hand, or say unto him, What doest thou? At the same time my reason returned unto me, and for the glory of my kingdom mine honor and brightness returned unto me. And my counselors and my lords sought unto me, and I was established in my kingdom, and excellent majesty was added unto me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the capital K, King of heaven, all whose works are truth, and his ways judgment, and those that walk in pride, he is able to abase. I love that last sentence. Those who walk in pride, God is able to abase. Nebuchadnezzar is a living testimony to that. Why didn't God kill him? That's an awesome question. God did kill Pharaoh, the captor of his people who refused to let the people go, the captor of the people who was so full of pride that he was willing to let his own people suffer all of those plagues in Egypt. And the Bible kept on saying that Pharaoh's heart got harder and harder and harder. After the chastening of God, his heart just became hard every single time. Nebuchadnezzar is a very bad man. But something was different about the quality of Nebuchadnezzar's heart versus Pharaoh's heart. And we'll see in chapter 5, his son Belshazzar has a different heart too. But there's something different about Nebuchadnezzar. He is a wicked tyrant king, a murderer, racist, slaveholder. I mean, not the kind of guy you want to just hang out with. But when God chastened him, his heart got softer, and he repented. And he is now at the end of chapter 4 praising and extolling the King of heaven. And so anyway, that shows, really the point of that was, it shows how merciful and long-suffering our God is. He does not kill Nebuchadnezzar because Nebuchadnezzar, God understood his heart, and his heart was the type of heart that would respond to chastening. So God takes no pleasure. No pleasure. He says that. He takes no pleasure in the killing of men. The only reason for that is because of sin, and if it's the last resort, it's what God will do in order to bring purity to the land. But Nebuchadnezzar, his heart was a little different than Pharaoh's. It was not clean, but it was moldable. And so God puts him through this crazy time, 7 years, I believe, 7 years of acting like an animal, and something snapped in his brain. Of course, you see the insight there, and a lot of people have called this insania zoanthropia. It's a mental disorder where a person acts like an animal. And that's a possibility. It could be that God just made him like an animal, and there's no medical explanation for it, but that is one explanation of what could have happened. Chapter 5. Belshazzar the king, so this is Nebuchadnezzar's son, made a great feast to 1,000 of his lords, and drank wine before the 1,000. Belshazzar, while he tasted the wine, commanded to bring the golden and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple which was in Jerusalem. Oh man, so he's at his party, drinking a lot of alcohol, and he's about to do something really dangerous. He's taking the temple artifacts that his dad stole, and he's about to do something with them. that the king and his princes, his wives, and his concubines might drink therein. That's crazy. Then they brought the golden vessels that were taken out of the temple of the house of God, which was at Jerusalem, and the king and his princes, his wives, and his concubines drank in them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and of silver, of brass, of iron, of wood, and of stone. In the same hour came forth fingers of a man's hand, and wrote over against the candlestick upon the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. So this floating hand just starts writing on the wall. And this is where that common saying, the writings on the wall, comes from, right here in Daniel. So the king is observing this. He's probably thinking, man, I've been drinking too much. But he sees this hand is just writing on the wall. Verse 6, then the king's countenance was changed, and his thoughts troubled him, so that the joints of his loins were loosed, and his knees smote one against another. I've been really scared before. I've never had the shaky knee thing, but this king can't control himself, and his kneecaps are like knocking on each other. He's so scared from what he's seeing here. Verse 7, the king cried aloud to bring in the astrologers. He's taking a card out of Dad's deck here. Get the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers. And the king spake and said to the wise men of Babylon, whosoever shall read this writing and show me the interpretation thereof shall be clothed with scarlet and have a chain of gold about his neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Then came in all the king's wise men, but they could not read the writing, nor make known to the king the interpretation thereof. Then was King Belshazzar greatly troubled, and his countenance was changed in him, and his lords were astonished. Now the queen, by reason of the words of the king and his lords, came into the banquet house. And the queen spake and said, O king, live forever. Let not thy thoughts trouble thee, nor let thy countenance be changed. There is a man in thy kingdom, in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. And in the days of thy father light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, was found in him. Whom the king Nebuchadnezzar thy father, the king, I say, thy father, made master of the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers. For as much as an excellent spirit and knowledge and understanding, interpreting of dreams, and showing of hard sentences and dissolving of doubts, were found in the same Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will show the interpretation. It's so interesting, as the king's son, Nebuchadnezzar's son, and how significant Daniel was, that there was no passing on of this information. And Belshazzar is just now learning about Daniel's name. Just interesting. Maybe that just shows that Nebuchadnezzar, among all of his negative traits, was not a very good daddy. Verse 13. Then was Daniel brought in before the king, and the king spake and said unto Daniel, Art thou that Daniel, which art of the children of the captivity of Judah, whom the king my father brought out of Jewry? I have even heard of thee that the spirit of the gods is in thee, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom is found in thee. And now the wise men, the astrologers, have been brought in before me, that they should read this writing, and make known unto me the interpretation thereof, but they could not show the interpretation of the thing. And I have heard of thee, that thou canst make interpretations, and dissolve doubts. Now if thou canst read the writing, and make known to me the interpretation thereof, thou shalt be clothed with scarlet, and have a chain of gold about thy neck, and shalt be the third ruler in the kingdom. Then Daniel answered and said before the king, Let thy gifts be to thyself, and give thy rewards to another. Yet I will read the writing unto the king, and make known to him the interpretation. O thou king, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar thy father a kingdom, and majesty, and glory, and honor. And for the majesty that he gave him, all people, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whom he would he slew, and whom he would he kept alive, and whom he would he set up, and whom he would he put down. But when his heart was lifted up, and his mind hardened in pride, he was deposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. And he was driven from the sons of men, and his heart was made like the beasts, and his dwelling was with the wild asses. They fed him with grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God ruleth in the kingdom of men, and that he appointeth over it whomsoever he will. And thou his son, O Belshazzar, hast not humbled thine heart, though thou knewest all this. He did know all this. Okay, of course he did. But hast lifted up thyself against the Lord of heaven, and they have brought the vessels of his house before thee, and thou and thy lords, thy wives and thy concubines, have drunk wine in them. And thou hast praised the gods of silver and gold, of brass, iron, wood, and stone, which see not, nor hear, nor know. And the God in whose hand thy breath is, and whose are all thy ways, hast thou not glorified. Then was the part of the hand sent from him, and this writing was written. And this is the writing that was written. Many, many, tekel upharsin. This is the interpretation of the thing. Many. God hath numbered thy kingdom and finished it. Says it twice, by the way. Many, many. So, God hath numbered thy kingdom and finished it. God hath numbered thy kingdom and finished it. All right, verse 27, tekel. Thou art weighed in the balances and art found wanting. You're not big enough. You're not strong enough. You are not measuring up to God's standards. Verse 28. Peres, thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. First time, by the way, that joint empire is brought up. And so here's the prophecy. If you remember the image that Nebuchadnezzar saw early on, chapter 1 or 2, I can't remember, where Nebuchadnezzar was the head of gold, or Babylon was the head of gold, and then the next section was silver. And anyways, God is prophesying to Belshazzar that the kingdom is going to be given over to the Medes and Persians. So the next empire is coming quick. Anyway, verse 29. Then commanded Belshazzar, and they clothed Daniel with scarlet, and put a chain of gold about his neck, and made a proclamation concerning him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. In that night was Belshazzar the king of the Chaldeans slain. And Darius the Median took the kingdom, being about 62 years old. 62-year-old Darius becomes king, and he is Median. So I don't know what happened that night altogether. I know that history tells us, and history affirms, that Belshazzar was slain. And I don't know if that night was like the takeover, the Babylonian fall, and the Medo-Persian takeover, if that was all in one night. If that was like a raid. Was there an army that came through and they fought and won, and you wake up the next morning and there's like a new empire in town? I don't know. I'm not quite sure how that worked, but it did. And so as we enter into chapter 6, there's similarities between Daniel and Joseph, as well as between the kingdom of Babylon and the Persian Empire and the Egyptian. But one of the bigger differences for Daniel is that leadership keeps on changing. So he's had Nebuchadnezzar, he's had Belshazzar, and now he's got Darius to reckon with. And so with all of these kings, there's like these stories of they've got this troubling vision or dream, and somebody digs Daniel out of the archives and pulls him up and says, hey, this guy could probably help you. And then Daniel helps him by interpreting, and then each of these three kings ends up promoting Daniel. So that only happened once with Joseph, and it was permanent. But with Daniel, it's like, new king in town. I guess I'm back down at the bottom of the totem pole, But, so in the same night he's promoted as third in the kingdom. That probably didn't matter all that much because there's a new king in town. Anyway, chapter 6. Let's see what Darius has to say and what happens with him. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom and 120 princes, which should be over the whole kingdom. All right. He's setting up his administration. He thinks, if I get 120 princes, I could be like the head, like the overseer here, but these princes, 120 princes, would be enough to really spread the leadership out. So it's kind of like his first wave of staff, that then each of them would have a staff, which would each, be doing different things. And so, you're seeing kind of the structure of how he's setting up his administration. And so he's got 120 princes over the kingdom, verse 2, and over these 3 presidents. All right, so it starts with Darius, then you've got 3, they're calling them presidents. And those 3 presidents actually are then over the 120. Let's see. Of whom Daniel was first. All right, so Daniel was one of the 3 guys. That the princes might give accounts unto them, and the king should have no damage. All right, so Daniel finds himself right off the bat. Apparently, Darius wants to not destroy everybody, but he wants to use who is currently in, which makes me wonder if the takeover was a little more peaceful than like a war. If it was, I don't know. I need to learn my history a little bit here. But if he's using the people who were already in power, that's just kind of interesting. But anyway, so Daniel is one of the top 3 dudes who are over these 120 guys. Verse 3, this Daniel was preferred above the presidents and princes because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king thought to set him over the whole realm. Then the presidents and princes sought to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find none occasion nor fault. For as much as he was faithful, neither was there any error or fault found in him. Then said these men, We shall not find any occasion against this Daniel, except we find it against him concerning the law of his God. Then these presidents and princes assembled together to the king, and said thus unto him, King Darius, live forever. All the presidents of the kingdom, the governors and the princes, the counselors and the captains, have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree, that whosoever shall ask a petition of any god or man for 30 days, save of thee, O king, he shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing, that it be not changed, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which altereth not. Wherefore King Darius signed the writing and the decree. Firstly, well, maybe not firstly, just comes to mind, Darius was not a good leader. So he is supposed to be the director of all this, and these people come to him, and they're telling him what to do, they're pushing him around, and he's just kind of like, I delegated all this stuff. I just want to sit in my throne and eat a turkey leg and drink wine all day. I don't want to be dealing with actual king stuff. So he delegates all of his power to the top 3 guys who then are over the 120 princes. But then a group of them, they don't like the structure. They don't like that Daniel is preferred above everybody, and so they find what's unique about Daniel. He serves Jehovah. So let's find a way to get the king to sign, and he is, hey, can you sign the bottom of this paper for us? Yeah, whatever. Signs the paper. And all of a sudden, Daniel's in trouble. Verse 10, Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went into his house, and his windows being open in his chamber toward Jerusalem, he kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day and prayed, and gave thanks before his God, as he did aforetime. Then these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. Then they came near, and spake before the king concerning the king's decree. Hast thou not signed a decree that every man that shall ask a petition of any god or man within 30 days, save of thee, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? The king answered and said, The thing is true, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which altereth not. Then answered they and said before the king, That Daniel, which is of the children of the captivity of Judah, regardeth not thee, O king, nor the decree that thou hast signed, but maketh his petition 3 times a day. Quick note here at the end of verse 12. The king understood that there was the way that the Medes and Persians practiced law. It was concrete. If a law was spoken and there was a punishment declared for breaking that law, and then that law was challenged or broken, like that law stood. Fortunately, this law had a timestamp, 30 days. And we'll see that it wasn't maybe as concrete as they were letting on, because later on Darius actually reverses the law. But this is not useful for Darius in the moment. He thinks he's bound by it because the way of the Medes and Persians is the law does not alter. Even the king didn't feel like he could change that. And as much as he loved Daniel, he's willing to go ahead and let the second, I should say, his first guy, like the vice president, get killed just because this foolish law was made. But the Medes and Persian laws. What are you gonna do? That's how he approached it. Now, this was not useful in this case. It was useful later on for guys like Nehemiah and Zerubbabel and Ezra, because they had a Mede and Persian law signed that said they could rebuild, that they could go back. And so when all of those guys wanted to say, this is unlawful, we're going to call you into question, as soon as they dug up that decree, that was decisive. So this actually proves to be useful later on, the fact that the Medes and Persians, at least they do what they say they're going to do. And if it's law, they're carrying it out. In this case, not a good thing. Verse 14, then the king, when he heard these words, was sore displeased with himself, and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him, and he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. Then these men assembled unto the king, and said unto the king, Know, O king, that the law of the Medes and Persians is, that no decree nor statute which the king establishes may be changed. Then the king commanded, and they brought Daniel, and cast him into the den of lions. Now the king spake and said unto Daniel, Thy God, whom thou servest continually, he will deliver thee. I'm sure Daniel had that kind of faith, but hearing it from the guy who signed the paper, thanks a lot. I'll see you some other time, Verse 17, and a stone was brought and laid upon the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of his lords, that the purpose might not be changed according to Daniel. Then the king went to his palace and passed the night fasting, neither were instruments of music brought before him, and his sleep went from him. Then the king arose very early in the morning, and went in haste unto the den of lions. And when he came to the den, he cried with a lamentable voice unto Daniel. And the king spake and said to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, is thy God, whom thou servest continually, able to deliver thee from the lions? Then said Daniel unto the king, O king, live forever. My God has sent his angel, and has shut the lions' mouths, that they have not hurt me. For as much as before him innocency was found in me, and also before thee, O king, have I done no hurt. Then was the king exceeding glad for him, and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no manner of hurt was found upon him, because he believed in his God. And the king commanded, and they brought those men which had accused Daniel, and they cast them into the den of lions, them, their children, and their wives. And the lions had the mastery of them, and brake all their bones in pieces, for or ever they came at the bottom of the den. Then King Darius wrote unto all people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, Peace be multiplied unto you. I make a decree, that in every dominion of my kingdom men tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and steadfast forever, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall be even unto the end. He delivereth and rescueth, and he worketh signs and wonders in heaven and in earth, who hath delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius, and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. All right, so just as we finished chapter 6, we've transitioned from Darius to even Cyrus. So this is the fourth king that Daniel serves under. Can you imagine? I mean, we live in a troubled nation right now. There's a lot of turmoil and controversy and whatnot, but nothing like Babylon, where you've got the leader, the king, decreeing that if everybody doesn't bow to him, that they're going to be killed, thrown into furnaces or thrown into lions' dens. Nobody's forbidding us to worship God. So anyway, think of if it were that bad, like if you were caught praying that you would be killed, then all of a sudden overnight, like you wake up the next morning and the king then says, hear ye, everybody worships Jehovah God, the God of the Bible, and no one else, God alone. That is a massive change, a massive transition. I don't think that it actually was carried out that well. Even the question remains, like, I wonder if Daniel cringed a little bit. You just legislated the religion of the Jews. That probably felt a little fell a little flat, maybe felt a little strange, you legislate, you make it law, a requirement. That kind of is actually opposite of the free will concepts that God wants his people to draw nigh with their heart, not just because they'll get a fine if they don't, But anyway, you get the heart of Darius there. He's a pagan king who's all of a sudden changed his mind, and he wants to do something for Daniel and for Jehovah. And so a little clumsy, I think. But the point of this here mostly is Daniel's faith and his integrity. And this actually, chapter 6 of Daniel always is, nostalgic for me. My first sermon I ever preached was in that chapter. And I don't remember how old I was. I was not very old. And my dad asked me to preach. I think we were doing like a youth night where the kids, we did all the things. We did the offering, and a couple of us boys preached, and Dad was giving us a chance to, to grow and practice in ministry, and it was a blessing to the church. We did songs and all that, and my dad actually gave me the outline. I remember the outline. Daniel prayed, Daniel purposed, Daniel prospered, and I remember preaching that. Felt very awkward. Did not do a great job, but it's a nostalgic thing anyways. But all right, guys, well, let's pray and we'll go about our day. Tomorrow we begin sort of a new concept or section in Daniel. So far it's been mostly historical. It lays the land, sets the stage, and then the rest of the book is Daniel's own visions. And we actually go back in time, by the way. So chapters 1 through 6 sort of tell an overall story of the history. And then chapter 7, I'm looking ahead right now, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon. So we actually go back in time in chapter 7 to Nebuchadnezzar's son, when he first becomes king. Daniel has his first vision. And so this is where it goes from being like the inspiring, simple narrative, historical narrative, to a little bit more challenging. We've got to think, we're seeing visions, we've got beasts coming out of oceans and horns and symbols and timelines and all of this stuff. And so we'll be talking more about that tomorrow. No less exciting, just a shift, and that's what I'm pointing out. So let's pray. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, their faith in a foreign land. I pray that we also would recognize that we love America, we love the land that we live in, but this world is not our home. We're just passing through. So while we're here, I pray, Lord, that you would use us to be like Daniel, to promote the health of the nation we live in, to also stand against its wickedness, to be faithful to your truth, and that would be a testimony, a light in the darkness. I pray in Jesus' name.